Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie O'Sligo-Jordan. I'm the local food program manager at Sustainable Solano. And also joining me from Sustainable Solano is Allison Nagel, our co-executive director. Sustainable Solano is a nonprofit organization here in the county. We work primarily in the areas of community resiliency, green infrastructure, and local food. And we also serve as the administrative backbone to the Solano Local Food System Alliance, which is why we are here today helping with this meeting. So as you know, we're talking a lot about land today, and I first want to pause, acknowledge, and honor the Indigenous communities who came before us on this land, who have inhabited and stewarded this land for generations. The unceded territory of California is home to nearly 200 tribal nations, and we will be dropping into the chat a native lands map, which will enable you to learn more about where you live. So also, we will be posting in the chat our agenda, and I realize for those of you joining us on your phone, this might be tricky for you, so I'm just going to, let's see if I can pull it up. Let's see if I can share, there it is. So if you want to just take a quick look here, we will have 4 different speakers, and we will have a couple of Q&A periods throughout. We will also put this in the chat so that you can follow along. Next, I want to just give a very brief background on the Solano Local Food System Alliance. They are a group of stakeholders that formed in 2017 as an advisory board to Sustainable Solano when we were working on a USDA grant. And by the end of the project, we all learned an awful lot about local food systems, and we really wanted to keep working together. And so today, the Alliance's mission is to create an environmentally regenerative, economically viable, and socially just local food system here in Solano County. And a couple of years ago, the Alliance decided that we needed some more education on certain areas. And so we now host some educational meetings on a quarterly basis with experts in fields that intersect with the local food system, just so we can get more information on these topics. They are open to the public, and as I mentioned, they take place quarterly. You can see some past educational forums on the Alliance webpage, which will also get put into the chat shortly. So just to give you some context, today's presentation on development, ag land, zoning, orderly growth, it's not new to the Alliance. Exactly a year ago, we had a related presentation with a lot of questions around urban agriculture and also where perhaps city planning ends and county planning begins, and also the role of land trusts and all of this. So as I mentioned, if you're interested, you can visit that recording and look at it again. It will be on the Alliance webpage. And so going back to the local food system, we know that access to viable farmland is at the foundation of a local food system. There have been many questions around land use that came up at various Alliance meetings. And now that we know that California Forever has land purchases and an intention to build possible cities, there are many questions. What is the process for this? Which agencies are involved? What does this look like with the general plan? And of course, when might the public get asked to become involved? And so joining us to answer a lot of these questions are 4 experienced and knowledgeable people. I will briefly introduce them because we have also added some extended biographies in the agenda. So if you'd like to read more, you can check that out. We have Mr. Harry Englebright. He is a retired planner who was with Solano County from 1977 to 2006, during which he focused on projects involving agriculture and open space issues. He was also a consultant for the county, completing the 2008 general plan update. Mr. Dwayne Crom began working with the Solano County Orderly Growth Committee during its founding year in 1984 and continues to be an active member. He was also elected to the Solano County Board of Supervisors in 1998, where he served as a supervisor for 8 years. Ms. Sadie Wilson holds a master's in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley and is currently the director of planning and research at Greenbelt Alliance, where she manages the organization's resilience hotspots work, among many other things. And then Ms. Osha Miserv, am I saying your name right, Osha? We've been talking all these times, and I realized I didn't get your last name. She is a shareholder and attorney at Solano Reserve Law Firm, which focuses on water and land use matters, including the protection of open space and agriculture. And she represents both private and public entities on environmental review, permitting, and litigation throughout California. One last bit from me, and then we will get started. Just on our Zoom procedures and housekeeping, this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to the Alliance webpage in a few days. Regarding questions, we did receive several in advance, and we will address those first when we get to the Q&A time. And then if any of you live attendees here with us would like your question addressed, please send it only to Allison in the chat. So we will take a look at those and make sure we get it over to our panelists. Again, I will reiterate that this session is focused on education around this topic. We are not going to engage in advocacy in either direction. Fun fact, I have a teenager. Allison has her own teenager in her own house. We've become very skilled in ignoring off-topic comments, questions. So we will do our very best to round up relevant questions and group them according to topic if needed, and then present them to our fantastic panel. All right, I think I'm ready to stop talking, and I will turn it over to our first guest, which is Mr. Harry Englebright. You are welcome to start whenever you're ready.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I'm going to briefly give you a little overview of the county general plan and our general plan growth strategy, and then talk a little about the process of rezoning agricultural lands and how the public can be involved in that process. So starting off, I think most people, when they think the general plan, they think of the land use diagram, and I'll be showing that in a few minutes. But the general plan actually covers a lot of different topics. This is the Solano County General Plan from 2008, which is the most current general plan. As you can see, it's quite a hefty document. We're required under state law to address a number of topics, including not just land use, but circulation, housing, resource conservation, open space, noise, safety, including flooding, fire, seismic safety. In addition, our general plan has chapters dealing with public facilities and services, parks and recreation, economic development. The 2008 general plan incorporated for the first time policies addressing climate change. I think we have some 90 policies throughout the plan doing that. And for the first time, we actually adopted an agricultural chapter. This is something I think the ag community has been wanting for quite some time. In preparing that chapter, the county ag commissioner contracted with UC Davis Ag Issue Center. They conducted a very extensive study on agriculture in the county, and that was used as input into creating the agricultural chapter. And as a result of that, the general plan calls for the county to develop strategic plans for each of the 10 areas that were identified in that study to look at the ongoing issues that agricultural faces, the infrastructure needs, opportunities for value added, and to develop specific zoning ordinances and zoning codes and designations for each of the individual agricultural areas, rather than just having one overall reaching ag zoning district. So I'm going to bring up the general plan diagram. Hopefully that'll work. Hold on a second here. Lost it. Share screen. There we go. I'm assuming you can see that. Does that work?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, let me get that out here. So this is the land use diagram from our current general plan. Just to give you a little orientation, you know, the city of Dixon, Vacaville, Fairfield, Suisun down here, Cordelia, Vallejo, Benicia, and Rio Vista. Everything that you see in green is either designated agriculture or watershed in the Vaca Mountains and north of Green Valley. Within the cities, the yellows are residential designations, the pinks and reds are commercial designations, the purples and are business and industrial designations. The Suisun Marsh has the marsh designation. This stripe pattern is actually an overlay district addressing resource conservation and identifying kind of our primary or resource conservation areas that we wish to protect. So in preparing this map, we have to also look at the plans not only of the cities, but other regional and local agencies, and have to be consistent with those. So for example, in the Suisun Marsh, that's governed by the Bay Conservation Development Commission, BCDC. They prepared a marsh plan back in the mid-70s, and the Suisun Marsh Act was enacted following that. And under the act, we have to bring our general plan and zoning in consistency with the marsh plan, and actually have to submit it to BCDC and actually have them certify that we're consistent with the Marsh Act. The same thing happens within the Delta and the Delta Protection Commission. We have to submit our general plan and zoning and show that we're consistent with the Delta Protection Act and the Commission's policies and plans. We also have local plans that we need to be consistent with. We have something called the Airport Land Use Commission, and they're responsible for preparing airport land use plans around each of the county airports, including the Nut Tree, Rio Vista, and Travis. So they look at the appropriate uses within various noise contours. They establish what are the appropriate uses within clear zones and safety zones. And we have to submit our general plan and show that we're consistent with the Commission's land use classifications, and they have to approve our policies dealing with the airports. As you can see for Travis, I mean, the Nut Tree is relatively small, but Travis covers a good chunk of the county. So they have an important role to play in our general plan process. So what is the county's basic growth strategy? It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of obvious from this map. We looked at development occurring through we call city center growth. If something requires municipal services, land use, an urban density which requiring sewer and water service, that development is to occur either within the existing city or through city annexation. Our role is for promoting and protecting agriculture, protecting open space and resource conservation areas, and providing for what we call a limited amount of rural development. Most of that is rural residential, which is up here north of Vacaville in the English Hills area. This is not a new policy. It's been around, goes back in writing, if you will, back to the Cordelia area plan back in 1975. And then in the county 1980 land use element, it was laid out in that plan. But historically, it's been a policy unwritten, if you will, going back to the 1950s, since World War II. In order for the county to provide municipal services, it can't do that directly under the law. They actually the county would have to form a number of special districts in order to provide sewer and water service. And that county never took those steps to do that. And as a result, de facto, in a way, development occurred through the city, through city annexation in those early years. So that's our overall strategy. To implement this in our general plan, we've actually identified something called municipal service areas. So if you look around each of the cities, you'll see dashed lines. That's the boundary of the municipal service area. This is the one around Travis, the Travis Reserve area. In the old general plan, it was called an urban limit line. Before that, it was called an urban growth line. It's essentially the same thing. And so within the municipal service areas, development is going to occur through city annexation, with the city providing the necessary services. And again, our role in the county is to protect and promote agriculture, open space, and natural resource areas. Pardon me. So the question that's been asked is, how do we go about rezoning agricultural lands? Pardon me, I had a cold. Sorry. So within municipal service areas, it's a relatively straightforward process. If the city is going to annex a piece of unincorporated land, that action has to be approved by LAFCO, Local Agency Formation Commission, and there's a description of LAFCO at the bottom of your agenda. And as part of that application, the city has to pre-zone the land to the appropriate zoning district, consistent with their general plan. And then that rezoning goes into effect automatically at the time the annexation is completed. So outside of municipal service areas, the county is going to have really jurisdiction. There's a requirement in the state law that zoning must be consistent with the general plan. So if somebody's coming in and proposing a rezoning of ag land to, let's say, business park, the first thing that has to happen really is the general plan has to be amended to designate that area for a business park and go through that process. And that amendment might not just trigger a land use change on the land use map, but may trigger changes to the county policy. So all those things have to be taken into consideration. So, so what really happens is the general plan amendment is really the key to the whole process. If the general plan amendment is not approved, then rezoning and other development entitlement processes are moot. So that's the key. The early growth initiative actually is designed to help support the county growth strategy. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we get into the amendment process. So how does this happen? An application is made for a general plan amendment and a rezoning. The first action would be on the general plan amendment. Both general plan and zoning are subject to CEQA, the Environmental Quality Act. And so the first action the city does is, the county does, is it looks at what kind of environmental document is going to be necessary for this project. And if it's an EIR, it's going to prepare a draft EIR, and that draft EIR is put out for circulation for public comment and review. It's a 45-day review period, which time anybody can submit written comments on the adequacy of the EIR. And during that time, the Planning Commission holds a public hearing, and public hearing is strictly on the EIR, and you can provide oral comments. Once that that review period is closed, the county then has to prepare responses, individual responses to each of the comments it received. And the final EIR then is prepared, which includes the draft EIR, the comments, and the responses all together into one document. And once that's completed, then the actual review of the proposed general plan amendment is actually begins. What I tell people, if you're supporting an amendment or you're opposed to it, or if you have concerns about it and you want to participate in the review process, the sooner you submit comments, the better. You don't have to wait till there's a first public hearing. You can submit public comments on a project anywhere in the time frame of the project, from its application till the Board of Supervisors last hearing. So it's a pretty simple process, actually. The Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on the general plan amendment. There's public comment. You have 3 minutes, basically. So it's always better to have written comments if you have them, and then just summarize them in your oral comments. And at the conclusion of that hearing, the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors then conducts a public hearing. At the conclusion of their hearing, they take an action to either approve or amend the general plan, or to deny the amendment. There is an exception to that. So it's normally a two-step process, Planning Commission and Board. But under certain circumstances, because of the early growth initiative, there's a third step. And that third step comes into play when there's a proposed amendment to any lands designated as agriculture or open space, which includes marsh, watershed lands, park and recreation lands. So essentially anything that's green on this map is subject to the early growth initiative. And in that circumstance, when the Board of Supervisors takes action on the general plan amendment, it can deny the project, and that's the end of it. But if it approves it, it has to place that decision and that amendment on the ballot for a countywide vote. And at the conclusion of that process, the vote, the public actually makes the final decision. And Dwayne can go into more detail about the whole initiative process and the history of the Early Growth Initiative. But I would note in closing, putting the Early Growth Initiative aside, any action to amend the general plan that isn't subject to the Early Growth Initiative or to the zoning code can be subject to referendum. So if the board approves a project, you can circulate a petition, collect the requisite number of signatures of registered voters within a certain time frame, and have that decision placed on the ballot. It's a very difficult and costly process to go through, but it actually has been done once in the county. Back in the 80s, there was a general plan amendment approved by the Board of Supervisors. It became subject to a referendum, and the voters in the end actually overturned the board's decision. So with that, I'll send it back to Stephanie.
Thank you, Harry. Just a quick note to all of you, if you see the agenda that was posted in the chat, I do have a little section at the end of it with some definitions on some of these acronyms that might be coming up, the CEQA, CEQA, and the Environmental Impact Report. So after the bios, there's just like 3 or 4 things that have some definitions there if you want to check it out. Okay, so moving on. Dwayne. Mr. Yeah.
Thank you.
You are up to talk about growth initiative.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. And thanks everybody that's watching, and to Sustainable Solano and the work you've been doing to educate our folks about land use, agriculture, food supply. You're doing wonderful work. So I am a member of the Solano County Orderly Growth Committee. Got involved in 1984, which dovetails with what Harry was saying about the first time there was a vote to amend the general plan. And that was in response to the county's plan to build a new city. There was a proposal for a new city, go figure, a new city, that would have been built between Winters and Vacaville off of 505. It's where Heinz Nursery now sits. Oh, wait a minute, I should share my screen. Sorry, let me go back a second here. Share screen. There we go. And get my slideshow going. There we go. So before I go any further, I expect that over the course of this session, there's going to be questions that we can't dive into enough today. So I put my email and my phone number on the screen, and if you'd like to copy it down, feel free. Put it in the chat if somebody wants to do that for Allison. So we're available. The early growth folks are available. Oops, let me go back. Yeah. So here's our logo. We've been preserving farmland and open space in Solano County since '84. So it was in response to this proposal for a new city. And in addition, there was a initial proposal for the development of Rancho Solano. I'm guessing most of you are aware of Rancho Solano. It was originally proposed to be a county development outside of the city of Fairfield. So this new city and Rancho Solano both ran contrary to the longstanding county policy of what is originally municipal. There were folks from all over the county that found real problems with where this was going, the direction of the development that the Board of Supervisors at the time was headed down. So the Orderly Growth Committee started, and the first thing we did was take a look at how do we do a referendum initiative to undo the approval for the new city, which was called Manzanita, between Winters and Vacaville, and to stop the county from allowing Rancho Solano to be developed within the county. So that was 1984. Let me look at my notes here. So in that process, and this was the first time we had done initiatives. We were new, we were learning. So the putting together of an initiative is a pretty complicated process. It kind of falls under the general term of ballot box land use planning, and I'll get a little deeper into that. But for an initiative, what it takes is to have the proponents of an initiative come up with the language, and you work with attorneys to do that. You have to then submit the language that you are recommending to, in this case, of the county, to county council. If you're trying to do something within a city, you turn it into the city attorney. And county council or city attorney actually puts the title on the measure. It's not up to the proponents. There's a title in the summary that's written by the attorneys that work for the governmental agency. Then you go gather signatures. And in today's environment in the county with the number of population, it would take about 16,000 valid signatures to qualify an initiative for the ballot. So that's probably what Flannery's going to be looking at. After the signatures are gathered, those signatures are turned into the registrar of voters. They have to go through a validation process. And depending on how many are turned in, if there's a big delta above what's required, they can do a statistical sample. If it's kind of close, then pretty much they have to look at every one of them to make sure they're a registered voter in Solano County. That's the only people that are allowed to sign the initiative. After that's done, it then goes to the County Board of Supervisors, in this case, being the county. And the County Board of Supervisors at that point has three choices. They could either adopt the initiative with just right there, nothing else, no CEQA required, no EIRs. It's one of the good things or bad things about an initiative, depending on where you sit, but you're not subject to the same kind of CEQA analysis and EIR requirements that developments that don't go through the initiative process have to do. The local governing body can also ask for a study of the impacts of the initiative. There could be fiscal impacts, impacts on infrastructure, pretty open-ended. But by law, there's only 30 days that can be used to do that study. And then most typically, the elected body will choose to put the initiative on the ballot. If they take no action, it automatically goes to the ballot, the next regularly scheduled election. Then the other process, other than an initiative, it's called a measure. And that's what we did in Solano County with Measure T. The local governing board, be it a city council or a board of supervisors, they on their own initiative, should use the word initiative, on their own, their own discretion, can recommend that something be put forth to the voters that will, again, lock in with the same kind of powers that an initiative would have for land use protections. So let's see here, but those are subject to CEQA. If the county board takes an action to put it on the ballot, it first has to go through the full CEQA and full EIR process if it's a big enough deal that an EIR is deemed necessary. So the Solano County Orderly Growth Initiative, let me give our map now. Same map that Harry had. So this is the county land use map, and Harry did, well, it was always great working with Harry. He gives very complete information and points out the details, so you've got all that. So the in 1984, when Prop A was first put on the ballot, the map didn't look too much different. The cities were smaller. So, the cities the size of, Vacaville and Fairfield, Suisun, and well, those are the two that have probably grown the most in terms of land mass, and Dixon quite a bit also. The stuff in green has always been what's been protected by the Orderly Growth Initiative, originally called Proposition A in 1984. We did all the volunteer work. It was volunteers to write the initiative, hiring an attorney to make sure we got it right, volunteers to go out and gather the necessary signatures, volunteers to carry it forward to the county to get everything done. The County Board of Supervisors, I don't even remember if they did a study. Harry might recall that. I don't recall if they did the 30-day study, but they put it on the ballot, and it was a very close election back in '84. We won by something over 300 votes. It was not, it was kind of unusual. It was unique. And I think people were a little nervous about doing land use planning via this initiative process. These initiatives all have sunset dates. So it was a 10-year sunset for this first one. We were not aggressive. So it termed out in 1994, at which point we went back to the ballot. As volunteers, we wrote another one. We wrote an extension of the initiative. In this case, it was called the Orderly Growth Initiative. Prop A, everybody knew Prop A that was deep into the land use details, but not particularly descriptive. So we put a name on it, the Orderly Growth Initiative. Gathered the signatures, brought it to the Board of Supervisors, and then in this particular case, because the policies of what was originally Prop A had become so popular, the board decided on a 3-2 vote to adopt the initiative and immediately put it into effect. So in this case, it never went to the ballot. So we've seen now two different examples of how a proposition or a measure can be done. Then in 2008, as the project that Harry's last project with the county to update the county general plan, which took several years, full CEQA. At the end of it, the board had basically made a promise to the voters of the county that the restrictions on land use that have been embedded in place that now since 1984 to protect farmland and open space would again be put in front of the voters. So let me give you that. There it is. So Measure T, let's see, can I scroll down here? This is kind of the heart of, oops, I went too far, shoot, sorry. Okay, so this is kind of the heart of what's in Measure T. It's paragraph D. But if you go to the county website, resource management, general plan, it's an ordinance number, the ordinance number 2008-1, is the language that was in front of the voters, the whole thing. So this is just the heart of the issue. So why it was worked well, it provided each city with the opportunity to grow, reduce flood risk, prevented poorly planned growth and development, and assured the continued preservation of working farms, ranches, and watershed areas between the cities of Solano County. When this went to the ballot, it won by more than a 2/3 majority. This whole philosophy of protecting our ag land and open space via voter protection has been overwhelmingly popular in Solano County. So now we get to the issue of the day. So if Flannery, well, I'll back up a sec. So Flannery is the first time we've seen an action to try to do an amendment to the county general plan. So this map, all the gold colored parcels are what Flannery owns. There's 55,000 acres there that they've acquired since 2017. What we hear, we don't know. I mean, all we know is what we hear. We know this for the land use that they own. What we don't know, we only hear, is what they plan to do. And what we hear is that they plan to put an initiative on the ballot in 2024, which would mean the language of that initiative would have to become public sometime in the first quarter of 2024. Then it'll have to go through this whole process of going to the county council, getting titled, getting summaried, gathering signatures, and on they go. Until we see that initiative, we're not sure exactly what Flannery intends to do or where they intend to put it. I mean, do they think they're going to put a city down here, or a city here, and a city here, and a city there? We simply don't know, because they haven't told us. So to meet the deadlines for, oh yeah, I've already got that. They have to get done by the middle or by the first quarter of 2024. Flannery has said they plan to make public the initiative language by the end of January. We'll see. Yeah, and then we'll see. So that's where I'm going to leave it. I look forward to your questions, and I'm willing to bet there's a fair number of questions. This is complicated stuff. Again, thank you, Stephanie and Allison.
Thank you, Dwayne. I'm just going to read off a quick message that came through from.
Just real quick.
Oh, yeah.
I have a number of maps. Should I just continue to share my screen and I can flip between maps as they come in?
I would say maybe stop share for right now, but keep it handy. I think we will need to look at more maps.
Yeah.
So there was a chat that came through here from Bridget Hunley. I don't know if you guys on the panel have seen it. She says the current board, with the exception of Supervisor Williams, voted on November 7, I'm guessing recently, like last week, to remove transparency on who is supporting and opposing initiatives on the ballot. To be clear, that information of who is supporting and opposing an initiative was always provided on every ballot and now will not be. Will only be in the voter guide, which many voters do not read. Does anybody up? So is this the, when things do come on the ballot, I mean, I kind of remember this. You have, the opposition and who's for it and against it, and then you have the pros and cons, and it's almost like a debate going on within the voter guide. So if I'm reading this correctly, it sounds like maybe there would not they would not have that information readily available except for in the voter guide. I'll just leave it at that, maybe.
So I don't know if OSHA has looked at this from an attorney's perspective. I have not taken a deep dive in terms of looking at that language change. But as you say, Stephanie, all of these initiatives, any ballot measure, it's kind of like the state measures. There's a statement of the proponents. There's a statement of opposition. There's a rebuttal written by the proponents and a rebuttal written by the opponents. Opponents, yeah. And the summary again is written by county council. So yeah, the language of whose names are in there in addition to that, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have that information, sorry.
Okay, maybe it's too recent. I do want to just ask if maybe anyone from the Alliance or the Alliance Steering Committee has any immediate clarifying questions. Feel free to drop that into the chat to Allison. We'll give you a couple minutes to just think, and if you do have anything, before we move on to our next speaker. I'll just give it a minute here, see if Allison gets anything. Friendly reminder that there was an agenda posted in the chat, which has some definitions and some more extended bios of our speakers. All right, here is a question. So this is regarding voting in the ballot part. So can Flannery put something on the ballot in 2024 that bypasses the 3 steps that would normally be needed under the regular process? And how much would their initiative have to pass by?
Well, the three steps being gather signatures, take it to the board, gather signatures, get the signatures verified by the registrar, and then take it to the Board of Supervisors. Those steps are mandated under the law. So you can't skip any of those steps, no matter how many signatures you gather. So there's a minimum, but if most people go 25% over is kind of the classic margin of safety you want to do. But then goes to the board says no, put it on the ballot. The board says yes, in which case it's adopted unless there's a referendum, or do a 30-day for study. And the 30-day for study is a little slim. We actually at the Orderly Growth Committee went to the Board of Supervisors a month or so ago, asking them to start the study now, because the magnitude of what we're talking about is so much larger than anything we've ever seen before. But all the steps have to be done.
You may be also talking about the 3 steps going to the Planning Commission, the Board of Supervisors, and then placing it on the ballot. And if that's the case, yes, if he does it through the initiative process, he's basically bypassing that process.
Yeah, initiatives don't go to the Planning Commission, nor does the initiative itself, nor is that initiative subject to CEQA. If it's a big enough project, there will be other steps in the development process where CEQA would be required. But the initiative process, you bypass CEQA.
Right. I don't see any other questions right now, so let's turn it over to Sadie Wilson from Greenbelt Alliance.
Great. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, do we see this? Cool. So we're going to take a different speed. We've gotten to a lot of great detail with Harry and Dwayne, and taking a step back to think about some more regional impacts and broad scale impacts of planning decisions, and why as a climate resilience focused organization, we talk so much about planning. So first I'll do a brief intro to Greenbelt Alliance. We are a Bay Area nonprofit organization, so we cover the full 9-county Bay Area. This is actually our 65th year, and we work to educate, advocate, and collaborate to make sure that the Bay Area's lands and communities are resilient to a changing climate. And a big part of our work is supporting planning and policy decisions around land use through fact-based research and analyses, so we can collaborate with cities, with other community groups, with public agencies to make sure that the public and decision makers are well informed about the impacts of land use decisions, especially as they relate to climate resilience. So that's really a lot of the work that we do in this realm is advocacy and information about what land use decisions mean for our city building and our climate resilience goals. So let's start with vision, something planners like to talk about a lot. So based on existing research and demonstrated through histories of development and city making, we know the key elements for a climate resilient future. Dense clustered housing that is walkable, accessible to jobs and transit and key services, and greenbelt areas or surrounding ag lands, working lands, managed open spaces that are not just important for recreation or scenic beauty, but they're also vital for growing our food, sequestering carbon, managing wildfire risk and flood risks, and supporting our natural ecosystems. So that's all great. But unfortunately, that's not a reality right now. People can't afford to live in the Inner Bay Area near job centers, which forces people to commute from farther and farther away as they search for housing that fits their budget and their needs. So looking at just census trends from 2010 to 2020, you can see these trends clearly. In the Bay Area, residents are being displaced due to inadequate housing supply. And not only that, in living farther away, they're forced to spend more time in the car, more of their own personal income on transportation expenses, and contribute to GHG emissions. In California, 50% of our emissions are from transportation. So living closer to jobs, services, schools, all of those amenities significantly cuts those emissions. Next, sprawling development is expensive. This is a common misconception because for the developer, they're taking on, often greenfield development land, ag land, undeveloped land that's often much cheaper than urban land. So you'd think that would mean the housing would be more affordable, right? But in reality, greenfield developments have to build completely new infrastructure like water, sewer, energy grids, lots of roads, transit, schools, all of those things that our existing cities already have, they have to build. And so those costs are typically not taken on by the developer. Instead, they're passed on to renters or homeowners in the form of special assessments that can really add up for most people. And so most people living in a sprawl development type community often see those expenses far outpace their counterparts in existing cities. And so there, building within our existing cities is the way that we can support our local tax base and support things that we all need for good quality of life, like good quality roads, schools, public safety. But not only is sprawl driving up costs and GHG emissions, but it's putting more people and asset in harm's way, especially in the face of climate change. And this is huge for wildfire risk in particular, which I know anyone in California has experienced firsthand in one way or another. The wildland-urban interface, or the WUI, as many people call it, is where development meets the wildland. And these WUI areas are precisely where there is the highest risk of devastating wildfire. So just from 1990 to 2010, the size of the WUI grew by over 33% to over 190 million acres across the United States. And the number of homes in these land expanded more than 41%. So most of our development is happening in these WUI areas. And in California, right now, 25% of people live in a WUI area. A quarter of our population are in these intermingled places where they're living closely in relation to wildlands. And of course, there's can be many benefits to that in terms of scenic beauty. But as wildfires have become more and more devastating, that is not just because of climate conditions and vegetation, but it's also because we've continuously encroached on fire-prone lands with sprawl development. And so we're putting more and more people and assets and lives at risk. And we also know that not only do our open spaces and working lands play a vital role in climate resilience, but also in carbon storage, in habitat, in water and air quality, and impervious surfaces or hard surfaces, paved surfaces, cause increased runoff that further diminishes our groundwater resources, while also increasing our extreme heat impacts. So anyone in Solano County, you see some hot days, and in dense urban environments where there's not much tree canopy or green coverage, those hot days feel even hotter. And right now, existing open spaces and green spaces, they provide huge amounts of benefits in cooling landscapes and air temperatures. And so paving those further exacerbates extreme heat risks. So I don't have to tell you, but Solano County is a special place because of the balance that Harry and Dwayne were talking about, with urban development balanced by agricultural lands, wetland uses, marshes, open spaces. So this vision isn't quite a reality yet of our perfect climate resilient, climate smart communities, where we don't have to go drive long distances and get stuck in traffic, and deal with rising housing costs. But how do we get there? Hint, the answer is not building new cities, but instead using our planning and zoning tools that don't often get a lot of attention to really promote a climate resilient future. And given how influential the design of our land and communities is on our quality of life, where you live has so much to do with everything about how you live, how you experience your community, the time you have for leisure, the time you have to work, your health, your future. And so there are so many questions here that come down to land use and how we ensure a climate resilient future. And the decisions we make really comes down to how we use our land as a precious and a limited resource. And so I do want to take the opportunity to answer one question that we get asked a lot, is, do we have enough room in our cities? If we say we don't want to keep developing our open spaces or ag lands, in short, the answer is yes, that we can accommodate a huge amount of housing, 4 million additional units across the state, while also sparing 350,000 acres of undeveloped greenfields if we use our city spaces rather than developing in new greenfield areas. But I'm almost done, but I also wanted to call out a note on ag land, because we're here to talk about that connection. And many may heard this statistics, but I think it's pretty powerful, that just one farmer in the Montezuma Hills produces enough wheat for 6 million loaves of bread a year. And that's using only rainfall, no irrigation. And then you consider that over the last 30 years, the Bay Area has lost over 200,000 acres of ag land to sprawl development alone, just to sprawl. And that considering that California produces not only California's food, but resources for the nation and the world, and that we're losing huge amounts of ag land every day to development. And the bottom line is this is open space and ag land that we can't get back. And at the state level, we have committed to protecting and preserving 30% of all lands and waters by 2030. And at the national level, protecting 50% of all lands and waters by 2050. And the only way to get there is to protect our open spaces and our agricultural and working lands that are giving us so much, and we can't get back after developing. So a couple thoughts on what to do about it. Driving home some core points of city-centered growth, of course, maintaining our urban growth boundaries that focus development in existing cities, but also thinking about local plans and how we can strengthen our local planning efforts and our regional planning efforts to have a comprehensive approach to making sure we're developing in the most climate smart way. Also adequately valuing our working lands. So open spaces and working lands, they provide so many benefits to our water systems, air quality, habitat, and those benefits aren't being accounted for. And when you don't account for the real climate benefits that our ag and working lands have, it leads us to degrade them, and it leads to the development pressure that we're seeing today. And then finally, getting involved can be overwhelming, especially when you think about all of the barriers to climate action at the national and international level. But one of the best things that you can do to take action is get involved locally, and especially in letting your voice be heard. That sprawl is not just for someone else to deal with, but it's putting existing cities at risk. By developing an unincorporated county means less tax revenue, less services, and eventual, disinvestment in existing cities. And so by getting involved in local planning processes, and attending city council meetings and getting involved, you can have your voice heard. And that's something that at Greenbelt Alliance, we really support. That it can be intimidating, but there's easy ways to give public comment, and I'm happy to connect anyone to those resources. But I will stop there and turn it back over to you. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Sadie. I just want to piggyback really quick on your last comments with a question that was submitted earlier. The person says, what are the best ways to preserve and protect small to medium-sized farmland, and help farmers make a viable living so they can continue to help feed people? This is a question we ask ourselves every day at the local food team at Sustainable Solano. And, in addition to having access to land, it is also about the public purchasing local food. Perhaps institutionally will make a significant impact, but at the same time, if everyone on this call replaced a percentage of their food purchases with local food, that would also make a difference as well. There's resources at sustainablesolano.org on our local food page. And then later we can also circle back to the role that soil quality plays in some of this too. And I think I'll save that for later, but I just wanted to quick jump in that is on people's mind, I believe, is the food production and soil viability of these lands. All right.
Now, Stephanie, could I just step in for a sec?
Sure.
Sure. So Harry mentioned earlier in the general plan update process, the last one that was done, that there were 10 areas in the county that the general plan identified as good agricultural producing areas, and specific plans are in line for each of those 10 areas. Right now, the Suisun Valley has a strategic plan, close to a specific plan, but it has had a big focus for the last probably 10 years in terms of how do we support our local wine growers and vintners and a very viable agricultural and economic presence. And it's made a big difference for people that go out to the Suisun Valley today versus 10 years ago. You see a much more economically vibrant area. So I think there's similar plans in place for Pleasance Valley, the Dixon Ridge, and a variety of other areas. So that's part of what local government can do to help. I just wanted to add that.
Okay, thank you. That's, yeah, thank you for reiterating that. All right. OSHA, over to you.
Quiet. Okay.
There you go.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Just I practice land use and water law, and I want to let folks know I am not a specialist on initiative law and that kind of thing. I really think, Harry and Dwayne know more about the orderly growth initiative here in Solano County probably than I do. I think it's a very important aspect of this entire story that we're trying to help people understand better about how land use planning is working in the county, and then how you can be involved and why it's all going the way it is. But I just want to let you know that's not one of my specialty areas. And it is really kind of a specialty area, honestly, election law, initiative and that kind of thing. So I will have to defer if a bunch of questions come up about that. So I wanted to, you've gotten a lot of good information so far. And I think something that really strikes me, because I work in counties throughout the state on land use and water issues, and and I think and I've worked in Solano County mostly on Delta related and water quality and water rights type issues, but and on groundwater. But I mean, I think this county, compared to a lot of other counties that I see in the state, has done a tremendous job of planning for, to protect farmland, to protect open spaces, to try to provide the housing that we do need as well in a way that is orderly, as you've heard. And I think it's, no county is perfect. We know that. But, I think it is quite impressive what the county, not just the local government, but all the citizens and everyone in all the groups, like a lot has been accomplished here. And it's, and so I think that's part of why the Flannery acquisitions are so threatening and shocking, to the consciences of people who've been putting their heart and soul into trying to plan for the kind of future that Sadie was talking about for this county. But I think, a lot of people complain about how many laws there are in the state. Of course, there's federal laws as well, which I don't think we're going to go much into today. But, those laws do help protect the kind of values that I think are present in the county, and that were the impetus for the planning that you've been hearing about. So I think it's just important to kind of recognize, where you've gotten to. Now I'm gonna see if I can share I have just a few like pictures. They're not super important, but so if I try to put it on presenter, maybe that'll work. So just touching on this, can you see that slide about the project under CEQA? Just to touch on this, I do a lot of work on CEQA, and, love it or hate it. CEQA is a very important part of California land use. And I just want to point out that, even if there is an initiative that is not itself subject to CEQA that changes the zoning from agriculture, there are a lot of there's this project. If Flannery proceeds, it will be a project under CEQA, and all of the local and state agencies are going to have environmental review in order to support their decision making. So I just want to point that out, so that if people are afraid that, there won't be the kind of public process that we normally have for very important land use decisions, I think that will be there. The timing of it may be problematic depending on how everything lays out. But you can bet that when say state agencies like Department of Fish and Wildlife are asked to, approve incidental take permits for certain listed species, or things like that, or water rights changes that would go to the State Water Resources Control Board. You know, all those things, those agencies, they would be being asked to make a discretionary decision regarding something that we call, you know, a project. So it's hard to say exactly how that's going to play out, but it's something that will be there. And I guess I would say, you know, people, you know, CEQA gets bagged on quite a bit. And, you know, we've seen the legislature do some things in trailer bills and whatnot to try to fast track certain projects or speed up the environmental review processes, or maybe the litigation around these things. You know, that kind of backfired in the last round of trailer bills. You know, it's very controversial to do that. So, you know, I don't know how much power this particular group has at the legislature, but I don't imagine they would be able to get rid of this altogether. But, and the important thing about CEQA is not just that, is the fact that it identifies issues that we are concerned about and helps develop ways, you know, to disclose to the public what the impacts are, to develop mitigation and alternatives. So all that whole process is like a light shining on, and really thinking about, you know, when NEPA, the federal sister to CEQA, was adopted, you know, they kind of think, one thing they say is look before you leap, right? Because a lot of times we think like, oh, well, if they put a road here, you know, oh, it won't be that bad. Well, I didn't think about the fact that it would require, like, you know, a bridge over, you know, a waterway that has listed species in it, or whatever it would be, you know. So this is kind of our vetting process, if you will. Then the other thing that I wanted to touch on is water supply is obviously a huge issue for the county, and for the idea of providing water to a different area other than what's been planned for in your by your various agencies and the people of your county. And this is just a map showing the different agencies that are participating in the groundwater sustainability plan that was adopted 2 years ago now, I think, under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA. And that took a lot of effort on behalf of a lot of entities. And this is just coloring the entities that were together in coming up with that plan. But it took a lot of effort, and that is a very important part of the county's future, is being able to show the state that it can reach sustainability as required under SGMA. That was a law passed in 2015. And, you know, the Solano County, or the Solano subbasin, is not in terrible shape, but a report from Public Policy Institute of California, for instance, says that under, like, from 2000 to 2015, for instance, there was 11,000 acre feet per year of overdraft in the county, or in the subbasin rather. So it kind of depends, you know, as with all these things, it's complicated what metrics you're using and all that, but that's what the plan itself showed for that time period. So, you know, there is a challenge in the county, and in some areas, or in the subbasin, I should say, more than others, to, you know, get this right. So that's, you know, a concern of mine is, you know, upsetting the planning that's gone into that, because kind of the way that the subbasin will comply with SGMA. And then I stole these slides from Solano County Water Agency, but the other big provider of water to the developed areas, the cities in the county, is the Solano County Water Agency. And one of the main water supplies is the North Bay Aqueduct, which there's a picture of it there. And so that goes to these cities and to Napa, and is an important part of your water supply. Back actually. So one thing about the North Bay Aqueduct is that it is a bit salty in there, and sometimes it can't be used. So Solano County Water Agency is interested in extending it out to reach the Sacramento River, going to the east there. So that's something that they would like to do, and I think it's been dangled in front of folks that maybe, you know, these big group of investors could help pay for that, and maybe that would help, you know, provide a water supply. There is, you know, there's a state water project contract that is, you know, tied to the existing service area of the Solano County Water Agency. So, you know, it's not as easy as just building a new pipeline. But, you know, that's a possible surface water supply. And I should say, and I think it was in one of the questions that, you know, there is state law, something passed in 2001, SB 221 and SB 610. Sheila Kuehl was one of the authors, that required identification of a water source for a project to go forward. And that typically would apply at the specific plan stage. So, you know, there is a state law requirement that they get some kind of will serve letter from a water agency for something. I mean, usually it's not that hard if it's a planned area within a service area of a water district and they have a viable water source. Here, I think, you know, it may be quite challenging to get that complied with. The other thing I was going to point out is that this area is also kind of surrounded, at least on the north. So if, you know, here's where a lot of the Flannery acquisitions are on that map that was showed previously. And it's got a lot of restoration around it that's going in. This little Englebright tract is in the planning process now. Prospect has already been approved and is supposedly going to get built soon. Then Lookout Slough, they're also working on. So, you know, these restoration projects intended to improve conditions for endangered fish primarily, not super compatible with, you know, city development, and could, you know, and also are changing the landscape from what it was before. So the other concern is that these restoration projects actually are already taking out a lot of viable agriculture from production. And so that kind of makes it even worse if we would lose more agricultural land. And then let's see, yeah, this is actually showing the North Bay Aqueduct extension to the Sacramento River across the top there that they would like to have for Solano County Water Agency. So another issue that is just another thing on the table, which was talked about a bit, I think, at the Solano County Water Agency meeting last week, is habitat conservation plan. So the other way that your county has planned for the growth in this map, there's existing developments in the gray, and then the planned development is in the light pink color, like this up here, is that there's a habitat conservation plan that provides a pathway for anyone who is proposing a development project. And it also provides coverage to the Solano County Water Agency, for instance, for expansions of its facilities. I think probably like the North Bay Aqueduct extension, connecting it with the Sacramento River, for instance. The way that you deal with the listed species issues is by participating in a habitat conservation plan. And that allows you at kind of a programmatic level to, if you're going to take out, say, giant garter snake habitat or Suisun hawk or any number of different listed species, then you can pay a fee into this program, and it provides the authority that you need from the state and federal agencies for wildlife to be able to proceed with the project. And again, it's based on the existing and planned growth in the region. And so this map shows LSA prepared this, with the red is the Flannery parcels laid over the top of it. And somewhat, you know, alarmingly, I think, in a memo that was talked about at the water agency meeting, there are quite a few species for which Flannery has purchased most or some, at least, of the lands that are needed for mitigation for existing and for planned growth in the county. So that makes it that much harder for, say, if somebody has purchased land, within the urban growth boundaries of the existing towns and needs habitat as part of the permitting, they're going to have a very hard time. So in particular, the tiger salamander, vernal pools, and there's like a corridor type issue, as well as the green beetle and the Suisun hawk, like native vegetation that's still there. Farmland makes great Suisun hawk habitat as well, but there's a separate category for land that hasn't been cultivated. So this is kind of another way in which these types of a very large change in the land use planning for the county would impact investments that have already been made by a lot of people toward kind of this planning for growth and meeting the applicable requirements. Another kind of interesting figure from the general plan I thought was that if you think about these Flannery parcels being kind of down here, there's a lot of special problems associated with trying to do a bunch of housing in this area. I think people have talked about one of them that, if anyone who's been in that area knows, there's a lot of slopes, right? I mean, it's hilly, and the general plan is saying like, yeah, I think that says 16% slope or greater in that dark red area. So that also, leads to a lot of issues that would come up in environmental review and permitting and whatnot. But it's just kind of another reason why why it would be a very kind of arduous planning process to figure out how to do this type of large scale new city in this particular area. Other kind of things that have come up when people talked about it, depending on where it would be, is also there's major access issues. The roadways don't go to these places yet. And that's a major expense. And then obviously power is an issue. Also adjacency, if you were to go kind of toward that southern end, adjacency to, in Benicia, where there's, there are those oil refineries and whatnot that often have issues. So there's some toxics issues for air quality. So, I mean, it's kind of like a law school exam on issue spotting for, land use, if there was a subject such as that in the bar, which there wasn't. I don't think there is now either. But anyway, so those are some of the things that I think of when we talk about like what's implicated with this kind of proposal. It's kind of like shadow boxing right now, though, because we don't really know, it's a really big space that this entity is, occupying. And I guess that the other thing that not developed with development so much, but that I think goes back to the security of the food system, that's really important. And I think we need to think about ways now to mitigate and address in whatever ways we can, is, having the land go out of ownership from farms that, a lot of that is grazing land and it's used beneficially for dry farming, so it might not be your typical, oh, I saw a big irrigation system and row crops and whatnot, but all that's providing really important open space, habitat, foods, and more than anything else, it's not doing anything bad to the environment either. It's, it's probably beneficial for the most part. So that's what I worry about, is just in the acquisition itself happening, taking the longtime owners out of the picture, who would be the ones who would be investing in continuing those operations and, interested in, maybe trying to get grants from NRCS to do, improvements to their systems. I mean, that's what I was going to say. There was a question about supporting small family farms. And one of the things I found is there are a lot of grants and supports and technical advice, and there's a lot out there. The farmer has to be willing to interface with the government and with nonprofits who may be working on these things. And it's a lot of paperwork and it can be a huge headache, but that, those resources are there because of the terrible threat to farmland in this state. And I think in the Delta and in Solano, you know, we've been blessed with a lot of farm land and a lot of productivity from these lands that's providing a lot of benefits that many of which aren't fully recognized. And so my concern is that, and this happened a bit with the acquisitions that took place for high-speed rail right-of-way as well, where the lands may become, you know, they get run down, they don't get used, you know, they're not in productive use. And so bad things happen on the lands just while they're sitting there waiting to see what might happen to them. So part of what I've thought about, and I don't know, I mean, there's a lot of people on this call that, in this meeting that know a lot more than I do about the farming in the local area, but, you know, what, maybe there's some kind of interim thing that should be done rather than just sitting here waiting to see what's going to be proposed, to put ourselves in more of a proactive position of what are we going to do to try to, you know, keep the land in productive agriculture as long as possible, and hopefully get the chance to get that land back into the hands of farmers who will do the right thing with it. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Ocean. All right, on to some questions. There were several just about, you know, where in the process do EIRs come up? And I'm pretty sure that Harry and Dwayne have covered a lot of that. So I'm going to skip those and suggest if anyone needs a refresher, take a look at the video once we repost. Also, can everyone hear me okay? I think that my internet might be a little goofy right now. So, all right, I'm seeing nodding heads, good. There's a question here about, I believe they're referring to Travis Air Force Base. So this is probably a question for possibly Harry and Dwayne. Throughout the general plan, several line items discuss planning efforts to reduce or prevent any current and future missions with the Travis Air Force Base growth and mission. Has the Air Base made any comments or objections to the California Forever rezoning discussion? Well, actually, that's probably a question for Travis.
Right. Yeah, so Harry may certainly can weigh in. The Air Base never talks to locals about land use around the base. There'll be quiet discussion sometimes. There's a Travis Community Consortium, which is made up of a variety of retired military and local leaders, current elected officials, former mayors. They talk to the Travis folks, but Travis doesn't talk to the county. Travis doesn't talk to the city about what's good or bad, but they can hint, and sometimes they hint strongly about this is a concern. So we, you know, the county and the cities that are adjacent to Travis for decades have had a consortium of folks that go to the Pentagon on a regular basis and talk to the Pentagon leaders, not Travis, about the things that we're trying to do in the local community to protect the base, and you can get feedback from them. But the base itself, they're in a difficult position. They're a defense facility. They're not a land use agency type thing. Harry?
Yeah, no, you won't get an official, comment back from the base and the commander. Dwayne is correct. I mean, it's going to be some side discussions probably, but they won't take an official position per se. They stay out of the land use decisions.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, I'm not entirely sure what this person's referring to. MTC. So how would or should MTC be engaged on major potential land use changes, such as the Flannery proposal, in the Bay Area if they are not consistent with Plan Bay Area 2050? I think that might fall under your realm, Sadie, in terms of the larger regional plan. And can you tell us what MTC is?
Yeah, let's start out with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. That is also MTC ABAG. So they make they're in charge of they're our regional planning agency in short. And so as part of Plan Bay Area and a lot of the work they've been doing is they identify locations to support future growth and locations to protect as well. And they do this mostly through guidance, carrots and sticks. We have a lot of local control in California, as we know. So many decisions are left up to local, cities, counties. But with with some pieces of that, transportation dollars, RENA allocations, they do have more of those sticks. So that is one place where MTC ABAG in supporting all regions have to have a sustainable land use plan, and so part of making sure that they do that is focusing growth and supporting growth in existing communities and supporting transportation infrastructure to get there. And so that's they provide a lot of guidance on that. So I might have missed the actual question in explaining a little bit about what MTC does.
How would or should MTC be engaged on the major potential land use changes if they're not consistent with Plan Bay Area 2050? So I think the question is how to navigate that tension if what I'm understanding, if the larger regional isn't matching up with the local.
My understanding is that they are not consistent with Plan Bay Area 2050. And so I think MTC, I have not heard MTC take a position on this, but I think that would be referring them to that guidance, that I believe this is not a place where, ultimately it is a decision up to the county, the cities in the county here. And so they do not have the ability to tell the county what to do, but I think they would weigh in on how that lines up with the Plan Bay Area, which right now this is not an area that is included for planned growth, to my understanding.
Yeah, and that issue, transportation obviously is an issue that would get analyzed in whatever environmental review doc was prepared. I've seen some flexibility with respect to issues of, consistency. It's not like an on-off thing, but, when a new city would require the construction of, new roads and, public transportation lines, those are impacts that should be encompassed within the project. So it starts to really grow what the footprint is when you start to think about how a new city would be provided transportation along with everything else. And often it gets worked out, and unfortunately, in back rooms about like, okay, well, if we, the project proponents, give you X amount of money, transportation agency, then your letter goes away, and and hopefully that leads to the improvements that make it possible to, to serve the facility. I mean, the things we've seen, I think, are usually on a bit smaller scale than this, but, that's kind of the dark underbelly of that process.
Thank you. There was someone directing this to you, OSHA, but I'm not sure. I know you said earlier you don't spend a lot of time with actual initiatives, but the question is, can a specific plan be put into an initiative? And if yes, what approvals would still be needed from any local or federal agencies?
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe
I think
that's
what we heard is that the specific plan itself could be put in the initiative, right? But then that doesn't take care of all these other entities that would be required to make their own approvals. They would be saying like, okay, where's the analysis of this? So at some point, these kind of projects have to belly up to the bar and, do that process. I guess it would be interesting to see who is the lead agency, right? Because the lead agency is supposed to be the agency with primary approval authority. And sometimes these projects have a lot of important permits that they need, So if, for instance, the county level decisions were you know, encompassed within an initiative, then it would start to turn to, like I said, like Fish and Wildlife, the Water Board, you know, and then also all these federal, you know, agencies in addition, Army Corps of Engineers for wetland fill, you know, and there's cultural, historic preservation stuff that would need to get done. So, and then it's almost worse for the applicant sometimes because there's a game of hot potato that goes on because nobody wants to be the lead agency, right? So if it's not like obvious, you know, I mean, it's almost easier when a county or a city or kind of the main land use authority is the lead agency because, you know, then they kind of are the gathering agency that kind of brings everybody together, and all the other decisions kind of are listed as responsible agency decisions under that they consult with those agencies along the way. But when it's hot potato, you know, then you might get stuck with an agency that really doesn't want to, you know, review your project. But I defer to the others to add on to what I've said.
And the other thing I'd point out, if, for example, if you put the specific plan on as an initiative, and it's, you know, planning documents, you know, things change, conditions change, you may want to modify things. I think you then be locked in, and in order to amend that specific plan at some future date, you have to go back through the initiative process again.
That's a really good point, because I mean, often, and this is, you know, a frustration that applicants will have is like, well, they don't really know what's their mitigation requirement, say for Suisun Hawk, how many acres of, you know, row crops versus, you know, pasture land or whatever, like are going to satisfy the agency. And then the agency is going to be like, well, you know, we'll let you know when we know more, right? So if you're going to have a specific plan that accounts for all these future mitigation requirements, that would be very difficult.
Yeah, so there are so many unknowns, and I mean, that I think is part of Flannery's game plan, is to they've kept us all in the dark about specifics for 6 years now. So, you know, if they put a specific plan in, as Harry said, if they put it in an initiative, it might require another initiative to amend the specific plan. Or what scares me, they could simply gut the county's general plan and remove all voter requirements. I think they could do that by an initiative, in which case it's going to be a free-for-all. So it's going to take some deep review once we get our hands on whatever it is they're proposing. Orderly Growth does have a law firm that we have worked with for 40 years that is a specialist in initiatives. So they're kind of like, we want to see, you know, as we all do, is they want to see what these guys have in mind. And the Flannery folks have hired some very talented and very high-powered attorneys. So it's going to be very interesting once that language hits the streets. It's going to take, I think, a lot of digestion to figure out what it is they're trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Dwayne. There are several questions coming in still about water, and I don't know if that presentation that the water agency gave last week is up anywhere, but I think that would be a good place for folks to look. But I think the bottom line, maybe if someone could give a short answer to this, does anyone know, is there really water on the market that could supply a new city in Solano County?
I think the short answer is yes.
Okay.
Because I talked to a water resource specialist standing out in the hall at the water board meeting, and he said there is a market around the state for state water project water allocations. It's kind of like monopoly board pieces. You don't really move the water. You just have these pieces of paper that give you the right to get the water. But taking the water from, you know, above the delta versus below the delta, I don't know how that would play out with the state water agencies.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the free-for-all is on the private market, right? And you never really know. And that's what I saw. There was another question about groundwater where it was asking about going between the Suisun subbasin and, you know, the Solano subbasin and whether you can move it around. And I don't know if anybody reads San Joaquin Valley Water. Lois Henry has a paper that, I mean, it's excellent, you know, if you're a water nerd, but like that's what Vidovich and the other guy have been the Boswell people, I think, like they've been shipping groundwater between subbasins, but they say it's pursuant to contract, you know, and they're fighting over it and trying to block each other. And it's just, it's a free for all. So that's what scares me the most, I guess, is when it's a private deal where it's just like private water rights holders that actually have water that could be sold or transferred, you know, then make those kind of deals. It's a lot of demand, though. I mean, that we're talking about with the size of the city. What was the number of houses that's been thrown around? Do you remember?
Well, what we've seen, it's been in print. We've seen up to 400,000 people.
Right.
But we don't, you know, they haven't published anything, so it's all speculation.
Right. So like, say if you had 4 people in a house, then you're, you know, it's, you know, 50,000 acre feet of water or something, or if it was 100,000, well, it'd be 25,000 acre feet. If it was an acre foot, and then you could have that. Anyway, I mean, it's a lot of water. And I mean, if anyone who pays attention to the state water project allocation process, you know, they're always sad that they don't get the allocation they need, right? And they're always wanting to pump more water out of the Delta. Now, with this location, they're not quite as tied, you know, they could, if they could figure out a way to, you know, make the right deals with the right local agencies. But if last week is any indication, apparently, you know, that the Solano County Water Agency was not empowered by its board, you know, the board did not empower staff to go and continue these conversations right now because the level of opposition to doing so is so great. And, you know, and if you think about it, I mean, the county already has, you know, water supply challenges going forward on the surface water supply, like I've explained, you know, not just one piece of it, but, you know, trying to get the North Bay Aqueduct extended. There's also challenges with, you know, Berryessa, and that water supply source is very, I'll put the, there's a link to some of the materials from last week, but there's a chart in there that shows just how variable that water supply from Berryessa can be for areas within the county. So, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, there's a lot of big issues, like I was saying, with respect to it being kind of like a law school or a bar exam question, but I think water is one of them. And I think it's not immediately, you know, solvable. And, you know, every single major water project, which this new city would take major water infrastructure, is very controversial. And, you know, I didn't mention, but I guess another slide I didn't put up is, you know, this is like right on the part of it's within the primary zone of the Delta, that northern piece of it. And then part of it is outside of the primary zone of the Delta. But, you know, State Water Board is updating the water quality control plan right now and trying to figure out if it can impose minimum flows to support beneficial uses, especially fish, and basically talking about forcing larger diverters to put in more water, leave more water in the stream. So it's a very, even for the tiniest projects that are part of the, whether it's the Sacramento River system or the San Joaquin River system that feed into the Delta, are very difficult to get permitted, even if they're very tiny. And this would not be a tiny project. So, I mean, I think that's one thing thinking about Solano County Water Agency, for instance, you know, is it has kind of the wind at its back to try to improve its access to the state water supply that it is entitled to in the contract, because it's, you know, because it would be to provide water for these already existing cities and for planned growth. If that project got converted into kind of the, you know, the red carpet for Flannery, I think it would have a totally different feel to it. And I think, you know, that it would be even harder for that agency to achieve. So I think, you know, water supply will be, you know, a rate limiter, certainly for this project. And if anybody's saying like, oh yeah, no problem, like, you know, I don't think so.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions here asking some details. I don't know if you guys would have these, but here it goes. How much undeveloped residentially zoned land currently exists in Solano County? Ballpark, maybe. They're asking about units. I'm not sure. Units of housing, units, I guess. So how much residentially zoned undeveloped land currently exists that could be developed instead of converting the ag land?
Yeah, fair question. So the city of Fairfield right now is going through its own big general plan update process. And I'm trying to remember if in their documents, there's a chart or an inventory that shows within the city of Fairfield, but you'd have to do that city by city by city. And I frankly don't know. I think it's a great question. We think that in Fairfield, there's substantial amounts of land available to accommodate all of Fairfield's housing for decades. For using any rational projection number of units to be built. But the rest of the cities, I don't know. But simply driving around our cities, the older cities and the bigger ones, Vacaville, Vallejo, Fairfield. I mean, there are endless, not so great strip shopping malls and those kind of places that it's in the cities. There's utilities are there, and what would it take to convert an underutilized strip mall to hundreds of units of multifamily housing, for example? I think the opportunities are endless, but I don't think anybody has a quantitative answer at this point. Harry,
But you do, all the cities and counties need to have a housing element, right? And so that's been a big deal you've seen in the news lately, is the cities that haven't updated their housing element to be compliant with the requirement to provide housing and affordable housing in particular, then they have been, there's this builder's remedy thing going on and things like that. So, I think it's within the housing elements, which HUD, right, has, I think on that website, there's access to the housing elements and like what the inventory is and all that stuff. But I mean, I think long story short, it kind of depends on how much land you think is needed for a house. I think if you were like, oh yeah, it's going to be a 5-acre ranchette. No, never mind. But, we're supposed to be building more densely, within, nearer to the urban cores. So I think with that in mind, most of the, towns in Solano, I think probably, have room for the growth to do it within areas that can easily be serviced by, existing or expanded, smaller expansions of existing utilities. And then really, the limit on getting the housing going. I mean, I guess, I think it's kind of been a strength of the Flannery proposal has been that, we are in what's called a housing crisis. There's a lot of, talk going on about what's going on with housing in our state and how it needs to be fixed and why it's, why there isn't enough housing that's affordable for people, why we have so many homeless people or people who are close to being homeless. So, I think, but as far as we've seen so far, the proposals coming out of this group aren't necessarily showing that they're going to be super accessible for, lower income people. And those are the people that are struggling and that need that this, that these state law requirements for housing are trying to promote. So I think there's kind of a disconnect there. I mean, there might be a feeling that all housing is good, so let's go for it. And I've seen that sentiment, expressed around Flannery, but I think it's not very well thought out. And in terms of affordability, it's got to be a lot more affordable to create housing where these infrastructure costs are immense, right? So if you can connect in with existing services, even if there's hookup fees and all that, like that's going to be, in terms of actually getting the homes on the market that people can live in and that can help reduce the crisis that we're in with respect to housing, that's the way to go.
Yeah, just wanted to echo that point and add in, I think that's a great question and something that we'd be excited to think about when we have more details of what that comparative growth scenarios really look like. But I just did a quick search of the RHNA allocation for Solano County, where all units are allocated into existing cities, and it's around 10,000 units. And so that means that each city had to accommodate a portion. Just as my quick Google search, you can go search. I can provide the document, but they had to submit a housing element that could accommodate the number of units that that all add up to that regional housing needs allocation. And so that means that it is consistent with their general plan, that they have allocated space for those number of housing units. So it's both a supply and a demand issue that developers see greater opportunity for returns on greenfield development, where they can pass on a lot of costs to others and externalize those costs, rather than infill development has different parameters. And so really making sure that we're supporting infill development by limiting the opportunity to develop where there is a lot of opportunity for profit developing in greenfield locations. That's why we see so many sprawl development proposals, because you don't have to pay for the existing services that are already there. Instead, you pass on, you create the infrastructure and you pass on those costs to others, to who's living there next. And so making that pencil is, I think that is a big thing that state housing legislation has done a lot this year. And so I think that is a real opportunity here to develop in places like Fairfield that have been wanting growth for years. They have been trying to attract more development, and we have the plans are in place, the housing elements are in place to allow for that growth by right. So we just need the right people to build it.
So part of this is for folks on the call or watching. There's a lot of planning lingo talk going on. So RHNA is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process. And MTC, who was talked about earlier, and ABAG is a joint combo, every 5 years or so, get together and project how much housing is needed across the region. And then that housing, that across the region number of housing units is allocated to counties, and then within counties to the existing cities. So as Sadie was saying, there's Solano County has taken in all of the planned RHNA needs for the next 5 to 10 years and has room for them all.
But I also would suggest, the original question in terms of what's the total inventory available under current general plans in the cities and the county. That would be a great one to do a little research on and get the answer to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, there are lots of questions here, and we only have about 15 minutes left. So I'm trying to kind of scan here and see which kind of general areas we have not touched on. Let's see here. Okay, we've talked about Travis. Let's see.
While you're looking at those, I might just mention, I saw there was a question about the general plan studying farmland and the impact on local ecosystems. I mean, I think the general plan is from 2015, if I'm not mistaken, right?
2008.
2008. Okay. So that's the last, there is often an ag element of the general plan. I would say that the question, I think that when the county does go to update the general plan, that's something that is kind of a more recent discussion topic. I think it goes way back. It's not new, but ecosystem services, the kind of thing like I'm talking about, where it's like land and farmland is basically, if you look at the carbon emissions and things like that, just how much better it is for climate change and things like that than say urban intense development would be, for instance, and then in terms of habitat and stuff. So that would be something that could be in the general plan. I think you're probably seeing discussions of those kind of issues probably in other studies and things going on, and I think there are a lot of resources about that. And, when people talk about like multiple benefit and things like that, and I think that's part of the work to try to preserve agriculture is trying to, farmers don't like it when you say, oh, it's open space, right? Because anyway, there's a conflict there, but I think we have to find ways to be able to illuminate these other values and other benefits that come from having farmers work the land to produce, commodities. And part of that is trying to figure out how to quantify them. So that's something that could be done, in a future general plan update. I don't think that's included in the current general plan.
Not to a great extent, no. I mean, the county has adopted a climate action plan since the general plan, sea level rise plan. I'm not that familiar with them, but there's been some work done in that area.
Yeah, well, yeah, and speaking of updating the general plan, one of the fairly scary things is the ag open space land use protections that are embedded in Measure T with the voter approval. That has a sunset date of 2028, December 31, 2028. So we don't have too many years left, and we have to contemplate how to update the county general plan and think about how do we extend those protections into the future. So so a good example of how to do it, Napa County, when they have an initiative very similar to ours. They copied ours back in the mid 80s, but their last renewal, which was 4 or 5 years ago, they did a 50-year renewal for protecting their farmlands and open spaces. But Napa's farmlands and open spaces, or farmlands, also is the ultimate golden goose. If you have farmland, right? You know, that winery acreage just sells for fortunes. Well, it's a little different economic situation.
Here's one that's kind of interesting here. Can you help us understand more how the land that was planned for mitigation and protection of species was allowed to be purchased?
Oh, well.
Were there already restrictions placed on that land? And if so, how did it happen to get around the mitigation issues?
So there is no provision in any law that limits the ability of anybody to sell their property to somebody else, with rare exceptions. You know, sometimes there can be a restrictive covenant, like some affordable housing projects and Habitat for Humanity's projects. The buyer of the house has to sell it to another person when they want to sell it to a person that's qualified under their rules. But by and large, whether there's an HCP over it, or it's ag land, or it's in a Travis buffer zone, it's private land and you can sell to anybody else, subject to whatever rules there are about that land, but you can sell it. And nobody can stop you.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two buckets I would think of. One is if there's a conservation easement on the land, and that, the conservation easement continues to apply.
Right.
And the owner of the conservation easement, like Solano Land Trust, right, for instance, in this case, for the most part, continues to own that easement, and it continues to restrict that parcel. And then, so that restriction is still there. So, there is there's a map that shows that, yes, some of the land that's purchased does have those kind of easements on it.
Huh.
Yeah, and so those continue to be enforceable. It's just that it's, a different landowner. And then the other thing that I was kind of getting at with the HCP, the Habitat Conservation Plan stuff, was more that the Habitat Conservation Plan, which provides this pathway to be compliant with the endangered species laws that protect species and their habitat, that land. So that land, if it doesn't already have an easement or isn't already a mitigation bank or something like that, it doesn't have any restrictions on it. It's just been identified in the Habitat Conservation Plan as being an area that would be suitable for, say, Suisun hawk mitigation, or tiger salamander or something like that. So that's kind of, it's more conceptual, I guess. And the concern, just to make sure that folks understand it, is that that's mitigation for species that we think will be needed for the existing plan development in the county. And so if that becomes not available because something else happens to it, then that hinders the ability to move forward on the growth that was planned for, because the other thing is that if you do permitting directly with the agency, I mean, if you're a private entity, you have to go through Habitat Conservation Plan. You have to have a federal nexus in order to do what's called a Section 7 that allows you to negotiate your own incidental take permit with the federal Fish and Wildlife Service or NOAA Fisheries. So the Habitat Conservation Plan is kind of like the only pathway for those development projects. So it could be very, I mean, and it kind of speaks to one thing to think about, is that this proposal gores the ox of a lot of different kind of people. You know what I mean? It's not just, oh, tree huggers or, oh, people who love agriculture. I mean, it's also developers, honestly. It's developers and people who want infrastructure to do infrastructure for your existing towns. Those entities and those people are going to have poor effects from it. So that's kind of why you see this very broad coalition kind of coming together around this issue.
Yeah. I'm going to do two more quick ones, hopefully quick. Sadie, I'm going to ask you this. Let's see if you know what amount of the purchased land is in a 100-year flood type of zone. Because we haven't really talked about flooding. We talked about housing and Travis. Let's go to the next big event.
That's a good question. So when we got the Flannery parcels, we ran it through a great tool called the Bay Area Green Print that is great for exploring these types of things. And so from our understanding, roughly 20% of the proposed lands or of the Flannery parcels are in a flood inundation zone. And roughly 135 acres have been identified as suitable marsh migration space as well. So when we think about climate change and how our wetland and marshland ecosystems are going to have to migrate as a result of rising sea levels, one part of thinking about how we plan around that is marsh migration space as well. And so this is definitely a place that's vulnerable to flooding, but I think while a lot of wildfire risk isn't readily apparent, this is also a hilly area with high winds that we know that wildfire risk is changing very rapidly. And so when we think about climate risks, we have to think about so many factors that are outside of just where our our CAL FIRE maps are designating right now. And due to the conditions and rising heat and poor vegetation management potentially, that could also make this area very prone to high wildfire risk because of its isolated nature that is away from other development. So yeah. Stop it. Thanks for dropping the link to the green print.
Yeah. All right, here's the last one. What was the last successfully created new city in California?
I think a fair number of people would argue there is none. Well, perhaps Irvine. That was done many, many years ago. But there have been plenty of stories in the Chronicle's done a good job about Mountain House in Alameda County and California City, somewhere down in the desert, who are pretty dismal failures. So, this idea of being able to cut from whole cloth a new city, and it's got schools and shops and housing and the whole thing. I mean, that's not how you develop. That's not how cities come together. Cities come together with the people that live there and create a community. The idea that you can just build and then people will flock to it and you will have a community which would be a successful city, I think is a great fantasy. I shouldn't say great fantasy, it's a fantasy.
Okay, thank you.
You mean there's Newell Ranch is a big one. That was is that what you were referring to with Irvine? But that was a 45,000 acre purchase of a ranch. They got it from like one person now, I think. So.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
I don't know that it's successful. It's been very controversial, and I don't know how much it's built out. I know it's generated at least a couple California Supreme Court cases.
Successful for you.
I did not. Center for Biological Diversity had some litigation. I don't know. It's been controversial, I guess, even though it was a purchase from one ranch, I guess I would say.
All right, I do have one more. Sorry, I lied. Someone is asking, I believe this is in the context of having, this is the planning and zoning, so this is going to go to probably Harry and Dwayne. You've talked about the 10 strategic areas in the agricultural plan Pleasance Valley has pushed for years to have an overlay for the small farmers there. And the question is, as we move toward the next general plan, will part of the process look at if accomplishments were made in the 2008 general plan? So I guess maybe that's a two-part question, but the main one is, do you go back and look at the past one and see
how successful you were with implementing your last plan before
there you go.
Go into preparing the new plan? Yeah, I mean, that's a valid point. My understanding, and I haven't talked to the planning department in a while, but the strategic plan for Suisun Valley, I know work was done on the Dixon Ridge, and I think some initial work was done in Pleasance Valley, but I believe the only one that's actually been adopted is actually Suisun Valley. So there's a lot more work to do. The next general plan update might involve doing more specific work. When we did the last general plan update, we identified 4 areas where we did kind of more detailed planning, including Suisun Valley, Collinsville, Middle Green Valley was another special study area. So that may be a way to kind of jumpstart the process as part of the next general plan update. But yes, evaluating what your past successes and failures have been helps you identifying what you need to do in the future plan.
Right, we are at time. There were many more questions, so thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you for submitting all these questions. We will try to figure out a way to at least log the questions out there, and I'm hoping that maybe some of the panelists can just respond via email or something, and we can post them, and we'll try to group them according to theme so that it makes sense and doesn't take up too much more of your time. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We will be posting this, and we're really happy to see this amount of interest. And so we'll regroup with the Alliance as a whole and let you know what we'll do next. So thank you again.